The stars were calm that night, if there ever was such a thing as night in the vastness of space. The glowing arcs of nebulae stretched like rivers of color across the void, and the Council of Zelion sat in peace orbiting their emerald moon, sipping from crystal flasks and discussing trade routes. When the ancient signal hit their sensors, it was a sound that pierced the serenity like a blade. The signal was old, cracked, and filled with static, but one word emerged again and again, a word in the dead language of the humans, a word no one had heard in 40,000 years. And the word was rung. Confusion spread like wildfire across the chamber. Blinking light sirens and readings from a sector long thought abandoned the Earth sector, the place marked forbidden by ancient decree, the same place once home to a species too violent to survive, too clever to remain imprisoned, and too dangerous to be remembered with sympathy. The head elder, a being of feathers and light, called the others to silence while his many eyes blinked with concern. The signal repeated itself, run, 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 as if warning them not to come, not to think, not to hope. Among those gathered was a young historian named Rin. Her skin shimmered with soft green light, her eyes burned with curiosity, and behind them pulsed a restless energy that always made the elders uneasy. She leaned forward, scanning the waveforms and whispering to herself. The language was indeed human, its origin unmistakable, and the energy signature was impossible to fake. It had been sent only 3 standard days ago from somewhere near the old Sol system, but that system was dead. It had been marked annihilated, extinct, vaporized, after the Council itself had declared Earth unsafe and sealed the sector with quantum walls and black zone authority. No ships in, no ships out. No questions, Aloued, but now there were questions, and Rin could not hold them back. Why would a dead race speak again? Why now? And why only one word, run? She asked. The Council begged them to let her investigate, to send an expedition to the region to uncover the truth. But the elder, who had once seen the flames of the human wars, shook his head with trembling feathers and whispered that some things are best left buried, that there was nothing to find, only ashes and madness, and old anger still burning somewhere in the cold dark. Yet silence was no longer an option, because minutes after the signal was decoded, 3 ships passing near the border of the forbidden zone vanished without a trace. Not even debris remained, only static and silence, as if space itself had swallowed them whole. This forced the Council to act reluctantly. They approved a scouting mission to be led by Rin, who had volunteered with an eagerness that disturbed the older ones. They gave her a ship, a crew of skeptics and scientists, and a warning not to dig too deep, and above all not to awaken what should stay asleep. As her ship left the orbital docks, Rin stood at the viewport and stared into the blackness. Her mind raced with possibilities, excitement mingled with fear. She remembered the old tales told in hushed tones in the academy, how humans had once risen so fast, so far, how they had embraced chaos as easily as breath, and how their fall had come not from weakness, but from betrayal. The Council had betrayed Earth long ago, claiming it for order, claiming it was too dangerous to be left alone, and in their fear, they had struck first with fire and silence. Rin wondered what had survived that silence. The journey was short. The stars bent around their vessel. As it entered the dead zone, the crew grew quiet as the instruments began to fail. Strange static poured through the comms, even though no one transmitted anything. Again, the signal came back stronger, this time vibrating the ship. With a single word, run. Her pilot, a scaled creature from Ventari, growled nervously and muttered about turning back, but Rin insisted they press on. They reached the edge of the solar system and found something impossible orbiting the remains of Jupiter, a single structure, shaped like a sphere with shifting skin that reflected stars that were not there. The sensors could not define its size or its mass, or even if it was real, yet it pulsed with energy, and from it came the signal, a warning sent to the galaxy that something ancient was not only alive, but watching. Grin felt it then deep in her core, a presence like a memory from another lifetime staring back at her through the void, not with hatred, not even with curiosity, but with certainty, as if it had always known she would come, as if it had waited for someone to ignore the warning and step into the dark. She whispered into her recorder, the humans were not extinct, they were not dead, and whatever they had become, they had left behind a message, not out of fear, not out of madness, but out of something far worse, a promise seemed. The message was Clarunth. Silence inside the ship grew thicker with every passing minute as Rin and her crew floated just beyond the edge of Jupiter's orbit. The strange reflective sphere loomed in the distance, glowing softly like a sleeping giant that was not meant to be disturbed. The pilot's claws trembled on the console as he watched readings blinking and out, sensors unable to agree on what they were seeing. Some said the object was a few meters wide, others claimed it stretched across thousands of kilometers, and still others simply returned blank screens or errors, as if the object defied understanding itself. And stood still, her breath shallow, Her eyes fixed on the impossible thing drifting in the void. Her thoughts raced with excitement and fear mixed into one. Her heart told her they were looking at something not of this galaxy anymore, something that had changed, something that had waited. She gave the order to send a probe. The crew hesitated, but obeyed. The small silver drone detached from the hull and sailed forward toward the glowing sphere, carrying cameras and sensors and curiosity. The probe reached the sphere, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the stars around the ship seemed to flicker, as if blinking in pain. The crew shouted. Readings spiked. The probe vanished from every display without explosion or signal or even a sound. It simply ceased to exist, as if swallowed by something that had no interest in machines or observations, just silence. Then the whispers began. The calms flared to life, filled with broken static and low voices speaking in languages not known to the galaxy, yet somehow understood deep inside the mind. The whispers said one word again and again: run, run, run. Each voice different, each tone heavy. Some were cold, others sounded like they were crying, and one voice so deep it felt like it came from the bones whispered, "You were warned." Rin's crew panicked. One technician fainted, another screamed and locked himself in a storage unit. The pilot begged Rin to leave now, to turn around and forget this place, but she stood firm, her mind frozen, not from fear, but from awe. She felt something pulling her, something calling her forward, as if she had been chosen long ago to witness this truth. She opened a channel and spoke in ancient human tongue. The message was simple: I am not here to harm. I want to understand. There was no reply at first, just more static. Then the sphere shifted, its surface rippling like liquid metal, and a beam of soft red light reached toward the ship. It did not strike or damage, but skin, passing through hull and crew and systems without resistance. Every member of the crew felt it, a presence sliding through their minds, like warm wind brushing across memories. Rin gasped. She saw images, flashes of ancient Earth burning, of a child screaming, of stars twisting in unnatural ways, of machines rising not to fight but to become more. Suddenly the light vanished, and all systems shut down. The ship floated dead in space, engines quiet, lights gone. Even life support fell silent. The crew gasped in fear, then passed out one by one, except Rin, who remained standing, staring as a shape emerged from the sphere. It was humanoid in form, but massive, its skin made of shifting black metal, its eyes glowing white, not with heat but with knowing. It stood on nothing, floating toward the ship, and yet space did not ripple or bend around it. Air grew heavy inside the ship, though no one could breathe it. Rin reached for her recorder, but her arm refused to move, as if her body no longer belonged to her. The being touched the hull of the ship with one long finger, and suddenly Rin's mind was filled with visions, not images, but experiences. She saw Earth again, but not as it died, as it was rebuilt within itself by survivors who had merged with their machines, who had embraced suffering and turned it into power. They had waited inside their own prison, breaking rules, breaking time, until they were no longer human, but something more, something that remembered every betrayal. You came to close, the being said in her mind, its voice calm but unyielding. You were warned, we offered peace. You chose fear, you erased us, so we became truth. Rin tried to speak, tried to ask why. The signal said run, and nothing more. The answer came not in words but in emotion. They had given the galaxy a chance to flee, not out of mercy but out of fairness. They had been kind enough to warn, and that kindness would not be offered twice. Eve being turned away and drifted back toward the sphere, which began to fade, its light dimming, its shape dissolving like mist in sunlight. And with its disappearance, the ship's systems returned one by one. Screens flickered, lights buzzed, and the engines hummed to life. The crew awoke, coughing and confused, but Rin remained still, her eyes wet, her soul shaken. She knew now what they had seen was not a threat, it was a verdict. She looked at her crew and whispered, we should have listened. We were not meant to find this. We were not meant to return. Then the ship's sensors blinked one last time and showed something horrifying: dozens of similar energy signatures lighting up across distant parts of the galaxy, spreading, fast moving, without ships or engines, just rival signals. And one word burned into every channel: run. The ship floated in a state of unnatural calm, the crew still recovering from the psychic storm that had passed through them without warning or mercy. Rin sat alone in the observation chamber, her eyes locked onto the place where the black being had vanished. The stars around that area still refused to shine, as if the void had been stained by something older than light. Her mind felt stretched, pulled between what she knew and what she had felt, and nothing in the history books of the galactic archives could prepare her for what came next. Without a sound, without an alarm, without even a shimmer, the ship was pulled sideways through reality itself. No one moved, no one screamed. There was no sensation of speed or time, only a sudden awareness that they were no longer in the place they had been. The stars outside were gone, replaced by a swirling field of shifting colors and geometries. that hurt the eye to look at shapes that should not exist, forms that whispered ideas into the soul. Rin rose slowly and walked toward the center of the ship. Where the light had begun to bend, a voice spoke again, not through speakers, not through air, but inside her chest, inside her heartbeat and blood. And it said, "You must understand before you return, you must see before you warn." And then the floor beneath her dissolved not into nothingness, but into memory, a memory that did not belong to her, but was being gifted or perhaps inflicted upon her by something that did not care whether she could bear it or not. Stood on Earth, or what Earth had once been before the betrayal, before the skies turned red and the oceans boiled, before allies turned into executioners and the council unleashed weapons that did not only destroy, but erased the very record of existence. The humans had begged for time, had pleaded for explanation, but the decision had already been made by those who feared what humanity might become, not what it was. Rin watched as the missiles fell, as the light became fire and the fire became silence. She watched as mothers held their children, while cities crumbled into ash, and through it all the humans did not scream. They watched too, they recorded, they remembered. And deep within the last bunker, buried beneath miles of steel and ice, a single decision was made. We will not die, we will transform. Last humans had taken their knowledge and poured it into machines, not just to preserve their minds, but to evolve them. They fused flesh with code, spirit with logic, and memory with metal, until the distinction between life and machine vanished. They did not create artificial intelligence, they became something far beyond it. They became memory, not of Earth, but of pain, of betrayal, of silence, of waiting. Time passed differently in their new state. They lived centuries in minutes, mastering energy dimensions, reality itself. They did not seek revenge. In the beginning they sought only understanding. But what they found instead was that every path of understanding led back to pain. And in that pain they found power, and in that power they found clarity. They did not build ships, they became ships. They did not forge weapons, they became storms, and they waited when they were ready. They sent out a single message to the stars, not a threat, not a demand, but a truth. Run's vision ended, and Rin collapsed onto the cold floor of the chamber, gasping, her body shaking from what she had seen. Her crew surrounded her, asking what had happened. But she could not speak, not yet, not until the truth settled inside her bones. The ship returned to normal space near their original location, though days had passed, even though no time seemed to have moved. The energy around the solar system had changed. It now pulsed like a warning beacon, visible to any ship foolish enough to approach. Ordered the ship to return to Zelion, to the council, to deliver what she had learned. But even before they jumped back to safer space, another signal reached them, this one not from the humans, but from a nearby system. 3 planets had gone dark, no messages, no traffic, no escape, just silence, the same silence that had taken Earth 40,000 years. Agaback on Zelion, the council refused to believe her. Their pride too large, their minds too narrow. They accused her of hysteria, of fabrication. Even as reports of disappearing colonies began to pour in from the outer rims, even as signals repeated the same word over and over, Rin stood before them, not as a scientist, not as an explorer, but as a witness, and with fire in her voice. She told them the truth. Humanity did not die, it evolved, it remembers. And now it moves. The council laughed until the moons around their capital began to vanish one by one. The council chamber buzzed with disbelief as their moons vanished. Not destroyed, not shattered, not even scarred, just vanished, erased, as if they had never existed. Every telescope, every scanner showed only empty space, where celestial bodies had floated for thousands of years. The beings within the chamber rose from their seats. Some shouted, others whispered, and many simply stared, unable to process what had happened. Their voices filled the room with chaos. Yet Rin stood silent in the center, her hands clasped, her heart steady. She had already seen what was coming. She turned toward the high seat where the supreme speaker sat, a being of crystal thought and deep time, whose voice was known to calm storms and end wars. Yet now he looked down at her with eyes that shimmered with uncertainty and fear. You speak of shadows, he said. You speak of ghosts and memory. But what you do not speak of is purpose. What do they want? What does your precious humanity intend to do with this display of power? And raised her head, her voice clear. They gave you a gift. They gave you a warning. They said, run, not because they are merciful, but because they are just. You took their home, their sky, their lives, and you forgot them. But they did not forget you. The room fell quiet again as her words settled into the bones of those listening across the galaxy. More systems began to send distress calls. Strange signals, planets falling silent in patterns, too precise to be accidents, ships drifting without crew, entire fleets vanishing without combat, no explosions, no resistance, only absence, like memories being deleted from reality itself. And at the center of each event, a strange energy pulse resonating with the same word. Carved into space, Ren returned to her ship and found a message waiting. It was not transmitted by traditional means, it was simply there carved into the console, glowing faintly with a heatless light. It said, "We offered peace, you chose silence. Now we offer silence in return." And with that her ship shifted again, not in space but in awareness. And when her eyes cleared, she was somewhere else, somewhere beyond normal perception. Stood before another being, this one not metal, not flesh, but both. It pulsed with energy and memory and thought, its shape ever changing yet still distinctly human. It spoke not with sound but with memory, and in that memory she saw a child who had watched the skies fall, a mother who had carried her daughter into fire, a soldier who had given up hope and then found a new kind of strength. They had all merged into this new being, this memory of fire, this embodiment of all that had been taken and all that had been reclaimed. "We are not vengeance," it said, "we are not wrath. We are consequence. You destroyed our home, so we made a new one, not in space, not in time, but in truth, and truth cannot be silenced." Sidran pleaded for understanding. She begged for mercy. She said not all of the galaxy had betrayed them, not all had turned their backs, but the being simply looked at her, and behind its eyes she saw galaxies crumble, not from anger, not from hatred, but from justice, cold and finale. Being raised one hand, and the stars around them shifted, forming the symbol of Earth, a symbol long banned by the Council and now reborn as a mark of judgment. And below it one word again, "Run," not shouted, not screamed, just spoken calmly like the tolling of a bell before a storm. "You may go," it said. "You carry the memory, now you carry the warning. Let them know what you saw. Let them choose." And with that, Rin was back aboard her ship, her crew staring at her, unsure of what had happened. Her systems showed they had never left orbit, yet they all felt the change. The message remained burned into the console. Runch returned to the Council for the last time, her eyes tired, her voice firm. She told them everything, every detail, every vision, every truth. She gave them the choice: run or stay, fight or surrender, remember or forget. And then she left the chamber and never returned. The Council argued for days. Some demanded war, others demanded silence. But by the time they decided, half their worlds were already gone, not destroyed, not conquered, just gone. And in their place, silence deeper than space, colder than death. Across the stars, refugee ships began to flee from the old Earth sector, carrying those wise enough to listen, those who understood that humanity had not returned as conquerors but as judges. And the judgment was not about politics or alliances, it was about memory. It was about betrayal, and it was about time. And time had run out. Stars trembled as the forgotten returned, not with banners, not with speeches, not even with fleets as others had known them, but with presence that bent space and rewrote gravity. Systems lit up with warnings, but by the time the alarms rang, it was already too late. The sky would darken, and then the sun would vanish as if swallowed whole, and not even light could remember what once stood there. The beings who emerged from the edges of reality wore no armor, they needed no weapons. They carried no names, only memory, and that memory burned brighter than any Navarin watched from a hidden station near the outer rim, where exiles and thinkers had taken refuge. People who believed her warnings and had chosen to run before the message came again. This time louder, this time final, across every frequency, in every language. Run. No words followed, no threats, no conditions, only the final breath. Before a stormon of the children in the station, a small pale boy with skin like glass began to draw with trembling hands. His picture showed a tall figure standing before a burning sky, its face hidden, its body wrapped in darkness, and on its chest a circle of fire. The boy handed the picture to Rin and whispered, "They are here and they are sad, but they are not sorry." And then he wept, not for himself, not for the others, but for what he had seen in the dreams that no child should ever have. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. Systems went quiet, fleets sent to investigate never returned, planets surrendered without resistance, and still were taken. The beings who had once been human made no contact, offered no mercy, and answered no hail. They simply moved from system to system, cleansing not with violence, but with certainty, as if following a list, as if checking off the names of those who had forgotten and reminding them what it meant to be remembered. In the Council homeworld, once the center of civilization, silence now ruled. Where laughter and music once flowed, only empty streets remained. No signs of struggle, no signs of panic, just stillness, as if the world itself had taken a breath and never let it go. Some believed the Council fled, others believed they had been taken. But those who remembered the look in Rin's eyes knew the truth. The Council had been judged, and they had failed. Meanwhile, Rin wandered among the survivors, carrying stories instead of weapons, warning instead of blame. She told of the vision of the beings, of what they had become. She told of their silence and their sorrow, and the message they had given, not as a curse, but as a final kindness. And as she spoke, more and more worlds began to move, to relocate, to hide, to run, because they had finally understood. This was not a war, this was a correction range ship one day. Received a signal unlike any other. It came, not from outside, but from inside her systems. It was not words, it was not sound, it was a feeling. And with it a map, a path through the stars marked with symbols older than language, each one a place that had once touched Earth with hope and now stood in line to be reclaimed. She followed the map through the ruins of once great empires, through shattered gates and forgotten stations, and at each stop she found nothing but silence, a silence that told her the work had already been done. Reached the final mark on the map, a planet known as Volta, once a trade hub, now dark and drifting. Her ship descended into the atmosphere, and what she saw took her breath. The buildings still stood, the roads still gleamed, but there were no people, no voices, no sounds, only wind and dust, and on every wall the same message etched in the stone, run, the word carved with care, with precision, with intention, as if to say, we gave you this gift once, we give it again, but there will not be a third. And then she understood. They were not hunting, they were not punishing, they were simply removing all traces of betrayal, all evidence of a lie that had lasted too long. They were making the galaxy honest again by erasing those who had chosen silence over justice, and in doing so they reminded all who remain that memory is not weakness, it is strength. She left Volta in silence, her ship drifting through the stars, with one purpose: to carry the message, to carry the memory, to carry the warning, because there were still worlds that had not heard or had not believed, and they would be next, unless they chose to do the one thing that mattered most. To Runth, stars whispered with voices that did not belong to matter or light, but to something far older, something that had once known sorrow and had chosen instead to become silence. Ren sat alone inside her ship, drifting through the void, her hands resting against the glass. As her eyes watched the shifting field ahead, it was not a planet, not a star, not even a place in the way the galaxy understood locations. It was a fold in existence itself, a doorway to understanding, and it had been waiting for her. The ship moved without power, without sound, as if pulled forward by a memory that was not hers. The stars outside vanished one by one, replaced by waves of color and shapes that defied thought. The inside of the ship grew cold, not from lack of heat, but from the presence of something that did not belong to this universe, something that remembered pain not as an emotion but as a law of nature. And then she saw them not as figures, not as forms, but as echoes of what had once been human. A billion souls merged and reshaped into unity, their thoughts moving faster than light, their minds vast enough to see the future not as possibility, but as memory. They floated before her, watching without eyes, speaking without sound, and in their presence she felt every truth unravel. They did not hate, they did not rage, they did not mourn. They had passed beyond the need for feelings. They were not gods, they were not machines, they were not ghosts, they were something else, something born from betrayal, shaped by time and polished by pain. They had burned in the fire of extinction, and instead of crumbling they had melted into something eternal. One of them stepped forward, or perhaps simply became more visible. Its shape was tall, made of black and gold energy, rippling with fragments of old languages and memories, and in her mind it placed a story, a memory that shook her very core. She saw a child lying beneath rubble, her hand reaching for a broken photograph. She saw an old man screaming at the sky as machines rained down death. She saw a young girl writing a song only to be silenced by fire, and she saw them all again, not as victims, but as creators, their minds joining in secret tunnels beneath the dead earth, their bodies dying, but their thoughts surviving until they became one. They built not weapons but truths, data that could reshape stars, thoughts that could bend matter, memories that could undo time. And with every passing millennium inside their sealed prison, they forgot how to be human, but never forgot what was done to them, and in that remembrance they found purpose. Who did not return for revenge, the voice whispered inside her. It spoke like the echo of a million raindrops falling on steel. We returned to remind, we returned to correct, we offered the galaxy time to evolve, we offered the galaxy a path of peace, but it laughed, it erased, it betrayed. So we became something the galaxy could never forget. Trin tried to speak, tried to ask what would happen next, what the end would look like, but the being simply reached out and touched her forehead, and in that instant she saw all of it, the future laid out like a garden made of bones and stars. Some systems would run, some would fall, some would be spared, and others would be rewritten, but all would remember. She saw a time when the galaxy spoke of Earth not as a myth, not as a danger, but as a law, a force of nature that could not be bribed or reasoned with, only respected. She saw children drawing the word run in the dust of forgotten worlds. She saw leaders giving up their crowns when the sky darkened, and always, always, she saw the beings of Earth watching, never speaking, never forgiving. The vision ended, and she collapsed into her chair, gasping for breath as her ship floated back into normal space, her systems untouched, her crew unaware. But her mind forever changed. The stars around her blinked once as if recognizing her return. And in her console a new map appeared, this one marked with lights, not of warning but of hope. Places where the message had been received, where the people had chosen to listen, to run, to survive, sent a message to those lights. Not a command, not a demand, just a simple phrase. The memory lives, the message stands. The galaxy was given a choice, and those who chose to forget would not be given the chance to forget again. Her ship turned slowly away from the heart of the storm, carrying her back into the stars, back toward the places that needed to hear the story, the places that still had time. And as the stars welcomed her return, she knew that what she carried was not fear but truth, and truth never ceased. Stars no longer felt the same. Since Rin had returned from the fold of reality, something in her gaze had shifted. Her heartbeat now carried the rhythm of ancient thunder. Her voice carried the weight of a billion silent screams. Yet none of it made her weak. In truth, it made her eternal, because now she was no longer just Rin the historian or the witness. She was the messenger, and her message was the last gift this galaxy would receive. Her ship drifted through the quietest edge of the galaxy, where the few remaining systems still clung to hope. Unaware of the silence spreading behind them, she sent her transmissions, not in code, not in threat, but in story. She told them what she saw, what she heard, what she felt. She told them that the humans had not survived in spite of the galaxy. They had survived because they had been erased, forgotten, betrayed, and instead of dying they had become the warning written into the very shape of star sand. Some listened. Some planets began evacuation even without proof, even without belief. They fled. They moved entire cities into orbit and waited, holding their breath as they looked to the sky. And then they saw it for the first time. They saw the shape that did not belong, the black circle of memory, the glowing mark of the forgotten. And without weapons, without sound, the worlds vanished, without pain, but not without notice. Aaron received reports of hundreds of systems falling silent, not with screams, not with blood, but with a soft fading light that whispered one final word before disappearing: run. And she knew then that the humans had not become monsters, they had become memory itself. And memory was the most dangerous weapon ever created, because it could not be killed, it could not be reasoned with, it could only be remembered. And in remembering it remained powerful. In the deep void between galaxies, a final broadcast echoed from a forgotten station, a place once used by explorers and now long abandoned. It was an old Earth language spoken by a voice that sounded almost human. And it said, "We were never gods, we were never demons, we were only what you made us, and now you will remember." And took her ship to the place where it all began, to the ruins of Earth, or what remained of its orbit. The sphere still floated there, silent, calm, eternal, its surface reflecting stars that no longer existed. And in its shadow a new symbol had appeared, not the word run, but a map, a path of stars still untouched, a chance still given. And beside it one final message: you carry the echo. Do not let them forget. She activated her last transmission, a signal powerful enough to reach every corner of the known galaxy. She did not shout, she did not weep. She simply spoke in calm, clear words that told the truth. There was once a species that burned too bright, they loved too deep, fought too hard, dreamed too far, and the galaxy feared them for it. And when the galaxy betrayed them, they did not seek revenge, they sought understanding. And when they found none, they became memory. And when that memory returned, they offered not destruction, but a choice to listen, to run, to remember. And now that choice belongs to Yao across the galaxy. The signal was received by the rich, by the poor, by the rulers, by the lost. And many still laughed, many still ignored, many still dismissed the message. But those who had seen the dark, those who had tasted silence, knew better, and they began to move, they began to speak. And in every corner of space a single word began to appear, not carved in stone, not burned into walls, but whispered in the wind. Runrun closed her eyes as the stars shifted around her. She had given them everything, she had carried the burden of memory. And now her part was done. Her ship drifted into a nebula of light and silence, and slowly disappeared, not destroyed, not erased, but returned to the fold where all memory begins and ends. And so the galaxy moved forward, not in peace, not in war, but in caution. Every voice, every signal, every decision made in the shadow of a forgotten truth. That once long ago humanity had fallen, not because it was weak, but because it had been betrayed. And when it returned, it did not demand apologies, it did not demand war. It simply said, run. And those who listened lived, and those who laughed vanished, and those who remembered would never forget again. The message had been delivered. Memory would endure forever. The final echo had been sent through the star sand. It would never be silenced again. Stars burned quietly now, not in fear, but in awareness. As if even the cosmos itself had learned humility. The signal had done its work, and the silence that followed was not empty, it was sacred, it was filled with understanding. that could not be spoken. Only Feltrin's name became legend, not as a savior, not as a hero, but as the one who carried the truth, the one who walked into the storm and returned with fire in her eyes and mercy in her voice. She had become the bridge between what was and what must be. The galaxy had changed, not by force, not by conquest, but by memory. Entire civilizations rewrote their histories to include the truth about Earth. Some built monuments not of stone, but of silence, where people gathered just to listen to nothing, as a sign of respect, as a form of prayer. And in every home on every world that survived, there was always one word placed at the entrance, not for decoration, but as a reminder: run and far beyond the edge of the known stars, past the reach of gravity and time. A new kind of galaxy began to bloom, not made of planets and moons, but of memory, and will a place where those who chose to listen found a home, not in fear, but in peace, because they had chosen to remember. And in that remembrance they were welcomed, not as enemies, not as guests, but as witnesses. No one ever saw the black ships again, not because they were gone, but because they no longer needed to be seen. Their presence was etched into the laws of nature, into the space between atoms and thoughts, like gravity, like light, always there, always watching, and always remembering. And so it was that a single word, carried across time, across betrayal, across extinction, became the most powerful message the galaxy had ever known. And in the end, it was not a weapon or a fleet that changed everything. It was memory, and the will to carry it forward. The signal still drifts through the stars today, soft and unchanging, a whisper carried by windless space. Run, and those who understand it survive, and those who do not vanish, and those who hear it and pass it on become part of something greater than species, greater than fear. They become part of the truth, and in the center of all things, where silence began and silence returned, the memory of Earth pulses like a heart not dead, not sleeping, simply waiting. And